year. As Rachel said, he was supposed to come live in March of this year. Let me say that he said he would come anyway, even though we're in the midst of the COVID situation. But we're going to bring him live at the appropriate time. Professor Gunther Jikeli is a very interesting individual. He was raised and educated in Germany, became fascinated with anti-Semitism, and at the Technical University in Berlin, got his PhD in Jewish studies, anti-Semitism, and modern Europe. He came to the United States and a few years ago became affiliated with the Erwin B. Rosenfeld program of anti-Semitism at Indiana University. He's written several books, and he is extremely well versed in anti-Semitism and Judaism, and also teaches Jewish studies. I think without further ado, I'd like to let Professor Jikeli begin the program.
Oh, thank you so much, Larry, for this kind introduction, and also for the conversations we had over the past year or so. I always was very happy when I saw somebody from Florida calling, and I thought it was you. I wish I could be with you in Florida, and hopefully one day we can make this happen. But thank you to you and also to Rachel that we can do this now over Zoom, and to have this conversation here on Zoom. And I will try to keep it to maximum of 30 minutes, what I have to say, and hopefully we can then have more debate and discussion about what I have to say, what your experiences are. I came to this country 5 years ago, and Professor Alvin Rosenfeld invited me to come to this country to help him build up the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. And at the time, it's only 5 years ago, but it seems to be like ages ago. I had been working in France before on anti-Semitism, and that was in 2015. There was a number of very violent anti-Semitic incidents. And I thought that would be a good idea to step back, to go to the United States, where everything is a bit calmer, and where you can study the subject of anti-Semitism in a more peaceful environment, if you want. So this has changed now, and unfortunately I see a lot of things that I've been observing in Europe also now in this country, not to the same extent, but some of the trends I also see here now, and which I find worrying. So I want to go through a little PowerPoint presentation that I prepared, just to give you a broad overview. And if you would like to discuss some examples, I also have some examples, but first I just want to give you a broad overview of that. So let me see if that works in this screen sharing. So can you see this now, the first slide? Good, thank you. So when we talk about trends, so I'm interested in trends, what we see in different countries. I mean, first of all, of course, we are not in the 1930s or 40s, God forbid, but we see some clear waves of anti-Semitism coming back in different countries since the 21st century. So we see that anti-Semitism is becoming more violent again, that there have been anti-Semitic murders, mostly by white supremacists and jihadists. And that, of course, leads to an unease in Jewish communities around the world. And my guess is that also in your community, you now have to think about security in some of the events, maybe not on Zoom, but in the physical events across this country as well. Jewish communities have now ramped up security, even now a little town, Bloomington. There's a small Jewish community. They had always had an open door policy, and now they lock the door because they are fearing that somebody might come and attack them. So protective measures, physical, but also in other senses, are more and more necessary. We see that there is an anti-Semitic discourse that was always there on the margins, right? You had like extremists from the political right and left and Islamists. That is nothing new, but what is new that is drifting into the mainstream. We have some positive developments as well, that many politicians condemn anti-Semitism, but often only when it comes from the opposite political camp, if you want. So there's then a difficulty in overcoming that. And also, if anti-Semitism comes from minority communities, that is also very difficult to address, sometimes for good reasons, but also sometimes for not so good reasons. And then what we have is also a new development, is that the online anti-Semitism is exploding, so that enables anti-Semites to get very easily together and to inspire each other. So we see a radicalization of anti-Semites online that can go very fast, faster than in the past, where you had to meet people, go to some groups and some houses, but now you can do that online and connect worldwide. And you can also disseminate that more broadly, even if now it's a very recent development, Twitter and Facebook are cracking down on the worst cases, but you can still find a lot, of course, also on this mainstream social media platform. So something that has not yet developed is like an overarching political theme for anti-Semites that they can really unite. So the differences between these people from the radical right, radical left, and Islamists, they are still really big. Sometimes they unite in something that can be called anti-Zionist activities. So if you take it from the 21st century, there 33 people have been murdered in Europe and in the US. And this is exclusively from jihadists and white supremacists. And now, more recently in the United States, we have also radicalization of some fringes of the Black Hebrew Israelites. They advocate for Black supremacism. We don't have to go through this list, but these are this list of murders. Most of the anti-Semitic murders in Europe were in France, all of them by jihadists, and what you see in blue, the anti-Semitic murders were by white supremacists in the United States. So what we can see that these are the most violent threat or that Jewish communities face. But very often, every day, anti-Semitism is also as bad, has a very bad impact on Jewish communities. Often it comes in the form of anti-Zionism. And here, if we look into some numbers, I'll put together the numbers that are available. So this is from the Gunther Center in Tel Aviv, at Tel Aviv University. They put together annual reports on violent anti-Semitic incidents. And if you look on the timeline from 1989 to last year, well, you can see it goes up and down. And by the way, it's very difficult to establish these numbers. They have a good network of people who inform them in the Jewish communities mostly and report these incidents, but sometimes they get reported, sometimes they don't get reported. So, but this is, I think we can see a trend there that there is an uptick in the 21st century with some peaks. So one of the peaks is 2009, for example. That could be in relation, in some countries you see that more clearly, to the war in Gaza with Hamas. And you see recently, since 2017, also an uptick again. If you go for some countries, so we don't have good numbers for many countries, but we have good numbers for France, where they have very good system. They're the Jewish community, the biggest, by the way, in Europe. About 500,000 Jews live in France. They have a good system of collecting this kind of data. And you see very clearly an uptick since the year 2000. And some of the peaks are related to the Middle East conflict. But as you can see, even in all the years, has never gone down to the level of what it was in the 1990s. And another country where we have very good numbers, also because we have a very good, strong Jewish community there that observes the anti-Semitic incidents, the Community Security Trust. They, by the way, they also are now active in the United States to train people to improve the security of community centers. So here we see a more steady uptick of anti-Semitic incidents in the UK. And this is the data for the United States. So we have two different organizations collecting data, the Anti-Defamation League and the FBI. So the FBI collects only crimes that are anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, they call it. And the ADL collects data, incidents, they call it, that don't have to be crime. So that's why the numbers are higher. And depending on where you stand politically, you say, well, it was an uptick in 2013, already under Obama, or more clearly, I would say, an uptick since the last election with Donald Trump. But we have an uptick, seen an uptick also here, but later than in Europe. What does it mean? So these numbers that we get from the FBI, they have to be seen in perspective. So the Jewish population in the United States is less than 2%, right? But they have more than 50% of the religious bias, crimes of religious bias is against Jews. And if you have it in total numbers, you have, this is for the year 2018, 835 anti-Jewish incidents. And you have almost 2,000 anti-Black incidents. But of course, the percentage of Black or African Americans is much higher than Jews in this country. So this has to be seen, of course, in perspective, the actual numbers. And if you look, then there are surveys that have asked Jews about their experiences of anti-Semitism. So we see that in Europe, there was in 2018 a huge survey in 16 countries that had almost 40% of the people said that they were harassed because they were Jews in the last 5 years, and some even experienced anti-Semitic violence or vandalism. So this is a daily experience of many Jews in Europe. And in the United States, it's better. But still, in a survey in 2019, 23% said they became target of anti-Semitic remarks in person, and an additional 21% said they became target of anti-Semitic remarks online or through social media, and some even experienced physical attacks. And what we see in many countries, that the experience can be very different, even in France, where the numbers are even higher. In some areas, and depending where you work and where you live, and how quickly people can identify you as Jewish, it really depends on that. If you're more or less often targeted as a Jew. So if you're visibly Jewish, if you're male, and if you're young, then you're much more likely to be attacked for being a Jew. And so that leads to a situation where in Europe, many Jews try to or avoid wearing symbols that would identify them as Jewish. That is, on average, 70% at least occasionally avoid wearing symbols that would identify them as being Jewish. And this has, of course, in some, depending on your religious identity, if you want to wear a kippah, that's of course then a problem. In schools, it's even if you have a Jewish sounding name, and if your kids go to school, that's often a problem for the kids. So we have had in a number of countries cases where the public school couldn't ensure the safety for the Jewish students, and the Jewish students have left and for Jewish schools. In the US, the situation is better, but still 31% said they have avoided publicly wearing something that would identify them as being Jewish. So if we look then into who are then the perpetrators, well, it's very different from country to country, from situation to situation, but we have some statistics here. Police statistics are not so good on that, because often the police doesn't systematically look into who was the perpetrator. But we have surveys among Jews in different European countries, and here was a big one in the European Union that identified Muslim extremists as the biggest group of perpetrators, then the political left, and then the political right. And they did 2 surveys, one in 2012 and one in 2018. And they kind of got similar results. Christian extremists are also relevant in some countries, like Hungary or Poland, what you see here on the right. In Germany, there's a mixed picture. In France, it's, but in Germany still, surprisingly, with despite the very strong neo-Nazi scene that is still there and there's still a threat, and also the populist right that is now rising, the Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, that has a very revisionist agenda. That means not outright denial of the Holocaust, but trying to diminish the Holocaust. And in France, it's mostly among Muslims and people from the left that are seen as perpetrators. So it's a mixed picture depending on the country. Ideologically, that is coming from these 3 main areas, and the anti-Zionism, anti-imperialism from the left is often not really hurting Israel. This is also true for the BDS campaign, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against Israel. It's more often was demonizing Israel as a country, but it has a direct impact in many cases, and not only in Europe, also on campuses, many campuses, where then Jews are permanently accused to be somehow supporting this evil country. And this is impacting also Jewish students in this country. In Islamism, so organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood, they have this idea that Jews have always been at war against the Muslims, and that this war is still going on, and that the Jews somehow convinced the Christians to wage war against the Muslims in general. And then you have the white nationalist, white supremacist, and there are also some interesting developments. A lot of his old stuff that we know from Nazi type anti-Semitism. This Jews undermine the nation and Jews cannot be part of the nation. What is very prominent today among white supremacists is these what they call great replacement fantasies. That means that they accuse Jews of bringing in immigrants. So the murderer of Pittsburgh, for example, that was his rationale why he said he wanted to kill Jews, as many Jews as he can, he said, because he made them responsible for bringing in immigrants to this country. So that is a very prominent theme, that it was also the one of the main themes of this terrorist in Halle in Germany, who went out to kill, again, as many Jews as he could on Yom Kippur. But the door was well locked, so he couldn't go in. But he was, again, believing in this kind of conspiracy theories. Right, and then they all have a history, of course. So this anti-Zionism, anti-imperialism often goes back to some ideology from the Soviet Union that they disseminated already in the 1950s, but then again heavily in the 1970s, and that was picked up in many groups, and changing a bit the Marxist view from struggle of classes, saying these are now struggle of peoples, with oppressor people and oppressed peoples. So there was a change that still has an impact, and that you can see today, even when you look at the theories that some of these the people that refer to anti-imperialism, anti-Zionism refer to. And Islamism, that goes back to also modern movement from the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1930s that had a very specific interpretation of Islam. Qutb is one of the was one of the leaders there, and is still prominent. His pamphlets are still disseminated in Muslim Brotherhood organizations, who wrote a pamphlet with the title "Our Struggle with the Jews." Right. And you all are familiar, I think, with the white nationalism ideology that essentializes ethnicities and peoples, and has a very racist worldview. Right. And what we see is that these kind of extreme discourses are drifting into mainstream. You see that here and there are fragments of this of these I could say crazy ideas that people don't buy into, but fragments they get used here and there, and particularly with with social media. What we have seen, I've been working on a research project where we have observed millions of tweets and looked through them, where you see only fragments of these ideologies, and they get disseminated and not questioned, and people tend to believe in some of it. Right, and well, then we have examples where we have these extremes. Here is that from the Charlottesville rally. These are not mainstream, of course, and very few people sign up to their ideology, but then they get excused, or in that case, it took Trump a very long time to condemn these marches in Charlottesville, right? And we have, in the time when Trump got elected, we had white supremacists even very prominent leaders of white nationalists who endorsed Trump. And then again, it was sometimes the boundaries were not made clear. There are still boundaries, but it's a sign that these things are drifting into mainstream. And with, for example, Richard Spencer from the alt-right uses a new label to be able to disseminate their propaganda, and sometimes tone it down and do it in a way that it gets into Breitbart, for example, that is then also read by not extremists, right? But people who feel they are on the right and who take up some of these ideas. And so you can find other examples. Well, the Republican Party, for example, here in Chicago, gave this Arthur Jones a platform where he then were able to campaign. Then we have people like David Duke, who is still around and who has an influential website that often gets linked. You have somebody who's targeting more the younger generation, Andrew Anglin, who specifically made this website to target younger people. And interestingly, he uses campaigns even from Bernie Sanders to support Bernie Sanders with some, I would say, weird arguments, but where he's trying to influence people, younger people who are looking for maybe for a new political direction, or trying to find where they stand in the world. So some of these people are really targeting younger people on social media actively. You also have that from the left. You have even organizations like the Jewish Voice for Peace campaign. Their latest campaign is called Deadly Exchange, and they make the accusation where there's no basis for, but they say the police brutality that we've seen here in this country is because the police, the American police is trained in Israel where they learn all this brutality. So they go out and make these campaigns and are successful with their campaigns on many campuses. That's where they focus on. Well, we have we have members of Congress who push these boundaries and support people like the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, who has said very explicit anti-Semitic things. And we see that, just want to come to an end, also with Farrakhan, of course, who is still very influential, as we've seen also in the recent debates, and where some prominent people recently, in the last weeks and months, were referring directly to Farrakhan and his very openly anti-Semitic sermons. So he is still viewed by many as a leading figure, and also by many who are really part of the mainstream in politics or in the entertainment business. All right, and I think I want to stop here just to bring it together to say, well, we have really have to watch the what's going on social media, because it brings so many people together. I mean, we have the advantage with the online tools that we have now that we can have this conversation, but on a really big scale, anti-Semites also connect all over the world, and it radicalizes anti-Semites. And we have seen some studies. There was an older study in 2017 with the World Jewish Congress, that said there is an anti-Semitic message every 83 seconds. And in our recent study from last year, we saw that's now every 2 seconds only on Twitter. So that's really, and only on conversations directly on Jews or on Israel. So this is something that we need to watch, I think. And we need to think about how we can make Jewish communities safer and more prosperous, and fight some of these ideologies that still the majority, at least in this country, clearly sees as not acceptable. If you take it from the radical left or the extreme right or the Islamists, for most Americans, this is not acceptable. And I think we should stress and fight any attempts to make this more acceptable. Thank you. So I think we should get into discussions now. I see that there are some questions in the chat, I think. So maybe I can stop here. And if you want me to go into some of the examples, just let me know.
If you have a question, feel free to just unmute and ask, or you can type it in the chat, or anything else you would like to share.
I'd like to make a comment. How much is the anti-Semitism due to social media becoming so much more available versus changes in politics and international relations and other issues like immigration?
Yeah. I mean, as you've seen in this long-term thing, anti-Semitism has always gone in waves up and down, and often it's very difficult to really know why the anti-Semites come out at a certain moment. Often it works in, there's a dynamic to it. So what we've seen, for example, in these incidents, when there was, you might remember this in 2012, there was this horrible shooting in Toulouse in a school where 4 little children got shot, and a teacher at that school got also shot. That was at the time when I was in France. And that had an impact, of course, in the Jewish communities, but that's also an impact on anti-Semites who then we've seen a spike in other smaller anti-Semitic incidents. So anti-Semites get inspired by anti-Semitic acts. So there's then a self-dynamic of it. And the social media helps to inspire this. So what many of these attackers do, the most radical ones, they take a camera and film themselves while they're attacking, hoping that this will inspire others. And you can see that in their writings that they got inspired by others like this. So there's a self-dynamic as well. And the incidents, I mean, if you look into immigration, I think what's happening on the ground is often not as important as how it is talked about, right? Because what's happening on the ground, a lot of things can be handled in a sense that in a way that you make a compromise, or you if the issue is here to stop immigration from Mexico, I mean, you can discuss it, but it doesn't mean that you have then to have this conspiracy theory that Jews are responsible for all of that. So I think that's it has not so much to do with the actual events, but some events it's easier for anti-Semites to jump on it. For example, the COVID pandemic now. It's very easy for anti-Semites to use that and like indulge in their conspiracy fantasies and make either Israel responsible for it or Jews in general And we see many of these conspiracy theories also online. And some act then on it, but what we see definitely is a more integration between online and offline. But that's nothing like surprising. We see that in all kinds. That's not only about anti-Semitism. I see a few things on the chat. So, for example, yeah, one thing that, yes, Trump did issue a statement from the White House that condemned that, but I think it came, as you write it correctly, 2 days later. I think that could have done quicker, and there were some other issues as well. But yes, in general, we have the good situation in democracies around the world that anti-Semitism is condemned, mostly. We had one exception in the United Kingdom, that the Labour Party leader was very reluctant to crack down on anti-Semites. And I think it was a good thing that he got not elected, regardless of which party he was representing.
Labour.
Yeah, it was Labour, but I mean, regardless of what party he was on, I mean, if he were from the from the right, it would be the same, but it would have played out differently. So in UK, there's a very strong anti-Zionism that has also to do with their history, I think. So many people have this impulse of wanting to be anti-imperialist, and also they have a special issue with Israel. They have, as you probably know, not always been the greatest supporters of Israel.
There's a few questions there. One says, talk will not end the increasing anti-Jewish climate in the US. To what extent does the president's political stances matter in the social media era?
Well, I mean, I think I'm lucky that I cannot vote in a way, because it's so I'm observing these political debates on many things, and I have to say that the political divide I see on so many issues is probably a sign that, or it's definitely not a good sign, and it makes everything. It makes it very difficult to come to a good solution on anything. And on anti-Semitism, I think it's we have seen a rise, of course, of anti-Semitic incidents during the last 4 years, but I think that it would be very wrong and even dangerous to say, well, it's all Trump's fault, and when Trump will be out of office, then everything goes back to normal. It will not. Not only on anti-Semitism. This is a longer trend. We have seen a divide also under the previous administration, and the divide is only growing. I think the rhetoric of Donald Trump and his tweets are not helpful to calm down the situation at all. They put fire on it. What he actually does in terms of foreign policy, and especially regarding Israel, has had I think, in general, a very good impact, as we've seen now in the recent developments that Arab countries are warming up towards Israel. But this is not only, of course, not only because of the Trump administration. That has to do mostly with Iran, but also I've been studying with a colleague from, he's originally from Syria, and we've been interviewing Syrians in Germany. So now there are 700,000 Syrians in Germany who fled the war there. And many of them, some of them told us directly, saying, well, we were taught how evil Israel is, but what we saw is that the Assad regime and the Islamic State are even worse than what they told us about Israel. and they saw that Israel was helping people who were injured there. So the Middle East is also changing, and despite all the ideology and the brainwashing, really, from these very autocratic regimes, there are some people who question that. So it's not only what's happening there. It's not only from this administration, the impact of this administration. I'm not sure if I answered this question, but feel free to question again or to have a follow-up question.
I think there's another follow-up that relates to that. How do you explain the rise in anti-Semitism in light of Trump's daughter and son-in-law is Jewish, Stephen Miller and Mnuchin as well?
Well, I mean, I think if we look at the things what Trump actually says, he's just not, and I think actively he does not want to be a polite person, and he actively doesn't want to have a language that is seen as politically correct. So, but I don't see that he is directly anti-Semitic. So when we look at his family, I think that that doesn't explain us any trends really in what's going on about anti-Semitism. We see that some of the people that work for the Trump administration are deeply problematic. So the new ambassador, for example, to Germany, he has said things in the past that are, well, bordering on diminishing the Holocaust. And so he is probably Trump, and then he will be in charge. So you have people in the administration who get a platform, but sometimes then in the Trump administration, some of these people are then kicked out quickly as well. So I don't think there's anything systemic anti-Semitic in this administration, but there are here and there things that are really worrying. So let me go through this comment. So it's what is interesting, what we have seen in observing the extreme right. In the beginning, they had even David Duke, he was supporting Trump, but and that had to do with Syria, that many of them of the far right were supporters of the Assad regime, but when Trump went against that, they were not so happy with Trump anymore. So now Trump is not so much in favor of those of the really hard extremists on the white supremacists. And it is even what we see conspiracy theories that saying, oh, Trump is really just doing everything for the Jews. So we even have that also among the white supremacists, that they think, well, he's not really on their side because he's just a puppet of the Jews. And they use, of course, then his family relations to prove that. So it's, I mean, the anti-Semites, they can use facts and turn them around in any way it just suits them. So if there is then family related to this, that doesn't really, I think that doesn't really matter. It's just that white supremacists now, they have more possibilities with the internet, and they feel emboldened or felt emboldened for some parts, so they come up more. And And that can change, of course, again. So we have also from the extreme left, they also feel very emboldened now. The BDS campaign on campuses, at least, is taking hold. More and more professors also declare themselves as openly anti-Zionist and say, well, we are not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist. But then, as I said before, often Jewish students get targeted. And if that comes to a level that they feel, okay, there's acceptance from the mainstream, then these people get emboldened. I mean, that people get away with quoting Farrakhan is just a scandal, right? But it's he is still accepted as a black leader, and not enough people speak out against that. And so you have many situations where, that's my point, where this is drifting into mainstream, and it's important to keep these people out in any administration, whatever administration that is. In the Trump administration, as I said, this ambassador to Germany, this new one, needs to be criticized, I think. And people from the Democratic Party who have endorsed more and more these anti-Zionist policies and often openly anti-Semitic, they also need to feel that the mainstream is not accepting that. And the Democratic Party, in my view, has failed in large part to keep these people in check.
Well, let's get away from some of the politics. I think that we're getting off base. I'd like, specifically at Indiana University, you've said there's been some anti-Semitic issues. How have you personally and the Rosen Institute approached that at your local university?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we try to, so what is now, the university is encouraging diversity programs, so we're offering this as a course for raising awareness of anti-Semitism. We do a lot of teaching, of course, on the history of anti-Semitism, how anti-Semitism looks today. We have had, most recently, we've had a datathon and hackathon on anti-Semitism on social media, which was very successful. A lot of people signed up. A group from Florida, by the way, won the second prize of high school students and college students, a mixed group. So yeah, these are the kind of activities that we're doing. We're working closely with Hillel as well, if we can. Hillel has, on our campus, proven to be a good home for Jewish students of many different background and views, and they are very active and they are present on campus. And the current president, was one of the first university presidents saying these BDS campaign, these anti-Zionist activities, they should not have a place here at our university. It doesn't mean that doesn't exist, and there are some also faculty members who also misuse their classroom for propaganda. But this is, I think, in some bearable limits. So I think students, Jewish students here, we have about 10% of Jewish students here at IU. I think they can still feel safe and express themselves. And if they are pro-Israel students that want to go there, they can, and they get their letters of recommendation, the programs of exchange. And so the situation here in Bloomington is relatively good. So on campuses, there is an increase of anti-Semitism, but it's not on every campus.
Can you say something personal, how you got interested in anti-Semitism coming from your German background? And I'm sure that's not the most common PhD program in Germany.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I was, that was not at all what I had planned for my career. I have a degree in engineering, and but then in early 2000s, in Germany, for me, anti-Semitism was something of the past, of my grandparents' generation, that I thought, well, this is really behind us. And I was lucky to grow up in a neighborhood that was mixed, where we had many different views, but it was clear that racism wasn't a good thing, and now anti-Semitism was also not a good thing, but we would not speak about anti-Semitism. In Germany, it's strange, a lot of people praise Germany for how they have handled or have they dealt with the past. I don't think at all that they have handled that well, because on a personal level, nobody wants to speak about the potential or the possibility that in their own family there were perpetrators. When that is frequently confirmed in service. But anyway, in the 2001, I saw in my neighborhood where I was living in Berlin a rise of anti-Semitic incidents and conspiracy theories about 9/11. And I saw that's not only, bad for Jews, but this is really bad for the whole society, for how people think. So I couldn't believe how people would be so obsessed with Jews without even having ever known anybody who's Jewish in relation. And so I just saw how completely crazy that can become. And I got more and more interested into it. And that became more interesting to me than my engineering job. So I changed and did then studies in history and sociology, and ended up doing a lot of interviews with hundreds of anti-Semites, I guess, and trying to understand why they think that way. So during this time, it has only confirmed that this is really destructive, deeply destructive, even for the people who believe in these things, but for all society, and of course a direct threat to Jewish communities.
There's a few more questions on the chat, if we can work through those. First, how do you differentiate between legitimate political beliefs, for example, not building settlements in the West Bank, and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I think it's really easy. It's the same question as what's the difference between criticizing somebody and insulting somebody, right? So if you can criticize everything, but if you condemn somebody entirely and make lies about somebody, well, this is then beyond criticism. So if you say, well, settlements are not good, and you can discuss it. You can then say, okay, which settlements exactly, and what is a settlement for you, and is that just another neighborhood of Jerusalem, and what should be done with that, and that these are all legitimate questions. Even if I wouldn't agree with that, but say, okay, why should Jerusalem be then the capital? I think that is, of course, the capital of Israel, but people can question that, but question the entire country, its existence, well, this is a very strong indication that the motivation for that is rather a very old one, that they want to do away with the Jewish existence. So that goes, it can be individual, like individual against the existence of individual Jews. There's a long tradition of that in Christianity. And I think we have still to talk more about the impact of Christian thinking about Jews. What we see in many Christian communities, supersessionism is coming back. It means in many Christian communities, they think that the covenant of the Jews with God is not valid anymore, but it's now the Christians. It was only, we have to remember, only in the 1960s the Vatican kind of reformed that, saying, okay, both covenants are valid, and covenant between God and the Jews is still valid as well. But this is still a process, and for many Christians, they still have to work about this, and in some communities that is not a problem at all, but in others it is, and sometimes it's not. That people are conscious about it, but they still think in these terms, saying these very old stereotypes that they have in their head, saying, okay, the Jews, they just look at laws, but we look at the new pact and look at love and what have you. So there's a lot of baggage that comes from 2,000 years of Christianity that has had an impact on culture. If we're talking now about systemic racism, well, I think there's a much better argument to talk about systemic anti-Semitism that has really a long history in our Western cultures. And a lot of Christians are not aware of that. And some, even what we see in some places like Hungary or Poland, that some of these elements are coming back, that Jews are accused of killing Jesus and these kind of things. So yeah, there's still a lot of things to do. And which is, if you take an historical perspective, it's not very surprising, right? Because this is a recent development, and that was done often from above. But it plays out a bit differently in the United States, because you have strong evangelical groups that have very particular perspective on that. But yeah, also among some American Christian communities, this supersessionism is coming back.
You gave some information about Hungary, but what about other Eastern European countries, especially Russia?
Yeah, Russia is interesting. I mean, it's difficult to know exactly what's going on in Russia, but Putin doesn't seem to be an anti-Semite. But he uses often the accusation of anti-Semitism then in the Ukraine, for example, to enforce his nationalist Russian politics. So I think it's complicated in Russia. I mean, Russia historically has been a very bad place for Jews. The Tsar was horrible with Jews, and then the Russian Revolution and the communists were horrible to Jewish communities. So compared to that, it's better under Putin. But yeah, there is also the Orthodox Church is a bit different, the Russian Orthodox Church, than what we have in Hungary, in Hungary and in Poland. Poland, I think 96% or so are Catholic. So yeah, it's what we see. What I get reports from is mostly from Hungary and Poland. I'm not too familiar with what actually is going on in Russia, but we have seen that some Jewish community leaders, they work with the Russian government. But in Russia, you have also a strong, very nationalistic, many very nationalistic organizations that are also deeply anti-Semitic, but they often threatening the power of Putin. And so it's a complicated relationship there, as far as I know. But I'm not an expert on Russia.
I might comment that when Putin was a young boy, he had many friends in the Jewish community, and he has some of these friends are some of the oligarchs today. So he perhaps has a warm spot for Jews, but he's a superb politician and will use what he has.
I could make some comments on Jews in Russia.
Mhm.
My wife and I visited Russia 4 times, all over the country, including Siberia. And on one of our trips in Moscow, our guide happened to be a young Jewish man. And he asked our group, there was about 16 of us in our group, if we would like to go to the Jewish synagogue. And of course, everyone said yes. And we went to this absolutely beautiful, fully restored Jewish synagogue right there in downtown Moscow. It had a balcony that went, 3/4 of the way around. The traditional design. It was the traditional design. It was a huge building. However, I asked him how many members they had. They did not have very many members. But anyway, as far as Putin and religion goes, I happened to be on that trip over the Christian Easter. And he had been to the Easter service for 5 hours in the Russian Orthodox Church. And it was broadcast on national television in Russia. Of course, we don't see any of that here. But every cathedral that we went to that was Russian Orthodox appeared to be fully restored and in beautiful condition. And that's current information for what it's worth.
Thanks. We have another question. What do you think of the DNC allowing Linda Sassauer and other anti-Semites to speak at the convention?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the examples, I would say, where where this is mainstreamed, radical positions are mainstreamed. I mean, Linda Sassauer, she claims to be a feminist. If you look at what she actually does and what she aligns with, I mean, this is a fig leaf maybe for her other positions. But a lot of people want to buy into that. I think that's the problem. And then they support people like her. Probably for some, often these things happen very self-centered. So that, unfortunately, I've seen that as well here in the recent movement of the Black Lives Matter movement, where, of course, we have, I think in this country, still a problem with racism. But very often, those who are very active in it, they do that for their own, and often white people, they do that for their own purposes and just want to show how much they are against racism instead of really changing anything. So inviting somebody who can be seen as from a minority group is very convenient in that way. So I think that is part of Linda Sassauer's success. Because, I mean, even if you look into her speeches or so, that's not really anything of substance there. But the image that she prevents is very useful for many people who are self-centered in that sense. And also some of the positions are like they would not actively dare to say these kind of things themselves, but they might think a little bit in that way. So it's also in that sense useful. I've seen that very often in Germany when Israeli authors, for example, have a huge success in Germany because of their anti-Israel positions. They are not known almost in Israel. Nobody cares about them, but in Germany they tour and they get invited everywhere because people want to hear that. So I think, I mean, of course, this inviting Linda Sassauer is part of that, giving anti-Semites a platform and bringing that into mainstream.
Someone asked you to address the Black Lives Matter, and then a follow-up to that. What data have you collected about the Black Lives Matter movement and their partnership with the Movement for Black Lives? The movement has anti-Semitic and anti-Israel statements on their website. And SJP and other Muslim-related groups are causing conflict for Jews on campus. Do you have any data on this group?
Yeah, the best data that I think that has been collected in a systematic way is from AMCHA. I can put this in the chat. We had a webinar on Monday by Tammy Rossman Benjamin from this group, AMCHA, and they have collected this kind of data. They do reports. Check out their website. There you can find systematic reports with numbers, but also examples from all of that, what's happening on campus. And what I personally have collected so what I was saying about the Black Lives Matter movement that I've seen, that was from personal experience here and not in a systematic way, but we have started collecting data from Twitter with these keywords, and we're looking through it, but that will take some time before we have something systematic. But we have this Black Lives Matter and also the COVID, where we want to look at conspiracy theories around these themes. I think what I've seen so far, the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, is in some ways problematic. In some ways, it might lead to good conversations, but and we have seen on the fringes deeply anti-Semitic statements and acts on the website as well. But it's the organization, or the movement is more than the organization. A lot of people, when I look at our little town here, they just go to the rallies and they don't sign up, and they have never read the website. They don't sign up maybe to some ideology that you can find on the website. So it's a bigger movement. So I would be still a bit cautious in putting this movement into saying this is one homogeneous group. I don't think it is. But you're right, on the website, you can find very problematic statements.
Another question, have you seen any successful strategies for combating the anti-imperialism, anti-Zionism, anti-oppressors, anti-Semitism that is so popular now and gaining ground within minority communities in the name of intersectionality? Also, have you found anything that helps fight the exclusion of students within student organizations who will not denounce Israel?
Right. I mean, as you've seen in Florida was this case, and in many places, that Jewish students then get, for their actual pro-Israel position or just imagined one, they get vilified and they even have to step down in some cases. So what I've seen, and there are only a few successful examples that I've seen. The biggest success was in the elections in the United Kingdom, when the British people said, we don't want an anti-Semitic leader. So I found that very encouraging. That was apparently, if you look into some surveys, that was what a lot of people felt in these elections, that there was something wrong with the Labour Party and that they didn't want to have an anti-Semitic leader leading the country. So that was something on a larger scale. And then what initiatives like AMCHA or the Brandeis Center, the Brandeis Center supports Jewish students in lawsuits. And AMCHA is trying to protect Jewish students. There are different ways to do that. Broadly speaking, you can say, well, to make the argument, and this is also only recently possible, to make the argument, Jews as Jews are targeted on campus, there was often the problem that administrators could say, well, this is not an ethnic group, this is a religious group, and this is not protected, so this is we are not obliged to. This has changed now, so it's maybe a little bit easier, and with the it was initiated also already in the Obama administration, but then more forceful with the in the Trump administration that that Jews are then also considered as an ethnic group, and that are they therefore protected. But then what is the protection? How are they targeted as Jews is then the question. So often the argument is then made, if there's an anti-Zionist campaign, they say, well, it's not because they're Jews, it's just because of their political views. And then they're not protected again. And that is now a little bit better because of the most recent, I think 2000, end of last year, there was this executive order that the IRA definition, so a definition of anti-Semitism that is now accepted by, I think, about 30 or more countries, that explicitly includes forms of Israel hatred in the definition of anti-Semitism. So then you can make the argument, if Jews are attacked because of some anti-Zionist views, then they are targeted as Jews and anti-Semitic, and therefore they need protection. But it's a complicated argument that a lot of administrators don't want to do. But that is one approach. Another approach is, what actually happens often on campus is that the events get attacked or shut down, or that people interrupt. Another argument that you can make, and this is now a new strategy from Amcha and also others, saying, well, we need to advocate for freedom of speech, and they also, all students from all backgrounds have to have the right to express themselves, and if that's pro-Israel, they have to have the right to express themselves without being disturbed, without being shut down. So you have these two strategies, and what is more successful depends probably on the local situation. But in both cases, it's important that you have some, that you don't have a whole climate was acceptable, that Israel is just a bad name, that Zionism is just like an insult, which is the case on some campuses. So if you have that established, then it's difficult to overcome it. And as long as you can say, well, this is these kind of things where this gets into insults of country, this is an anti-Semitic, and as long as you can make the argument, I think that is, you just need the people to speak up, and only slowly organizations, including Jewish organizations, realize what kind of long-term threat that is. I think it's great. I've seen that in this country, that Jewish organizations are very diverse, and they often support arguments. And we here have, as I can see from the comments, people from the left and from the right. And I think that's great that we all get together and discuss that. And many Jewish organizations encourage that, and I think that's great. But often organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, and some even question the Jewish identity of many of the members of Jewish Voice for Peace. But these organizations are deeply harmful because they're misused by anti-Semites. And so waking up to that, I think that is necessary to see. And I mean, organizations, they often try to make clear where their boundaries are. But I think that in many cases it needs to be the we have to have more people speaking up and standing for saying, well, exchange programs with Israel, why not? Like any other country. So, but this is, if we get into a situation as my colleagues in Paris, I had a very close colleague. He told me once, you know what, whenever I go to Israel to visit family, I never tell anybody because I just don't want to face from my colleagues and what it's like weird questions, accusations, why I go and visit this country. And I visit my family then. So when you get into this kind of situation, then it's very difficult to overcome. But on almost really all campuses in the US, we are not there yet.
Gunther, I think that the evening is going on. You've done a superb job. I finally get to see you. I haven't met you yet, but we've talked quite a bit, and we really hope that you will come to Jacksonville. I know that you're eager to do that, even in the midst of this pandemic, but we'll wait till it settles down a little bit so we can all shake your hand and really show you our fair city. Hopefully when it's a little cooler in Bloomington, you'll come down to Florida and warm up. I want to thank Rachel and the JCA for helping to sponsor this, and we will have many other great programs, and we will certainly have Professor Jikeli come to Jacksonville in the near future, and I wish you the very best, and keep doing your fine work.
Thank you so much. It was great meeting you all here on Zoom, and thank you for these great questions. Thank you.
Thank you so
If
much,
you want,
Larry, for sponsoring it.
feel free to send out my email or contact details to the participants if you want, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. I'll put my email in the chat if anyone needs to reach me about this or any other events. Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.